Welcome to my series, Unveiling the Secrets of Executive Presence. As a certified image professional and in my business style for life, I have the good fortune to work with some of Australia's most influential women who are committed to making a difference in the world and are not afraid to showcase their strength and courage with a powerful visual brand. These women appreciate that an authentic image makes them even more credible, confident, and impressive than they appear on paper. But as an ambitious woman, the journey to the C-suite can often be filled with insecurity, fear, judgment, and second-guessing all around whether your executive presence and gravitas is going to be enough. Executive presence is one of the most important skills for success in business, which is why I decided to start this series, because it is also one of the least understood. Unveiling the Secrets of Executive Presence provides insights into how to develop and use executive presence as a powerful tool for career advancement through interviews with the most accomplished senior executive women in Australia and also overseas. These women are highly respected leaders in their fields who concur that executive presence is a skill that should be learned and mastered to make a very real difference, and they share how to use it to achieve success both personally and professionally, and what executive presence has meant for them. Now, today I have the pleasure of talking to Michelle Gibbings. Michelle Gibbings is the workplace expert, internationally recognised. She is the award-winning author of 3 books and is welcomed on stages globally to help inspire leaders, teams and organisations to create successful workplaces. With demands on leadership increasing and the pressure to perform unparalleled, Michelle is empowering people to work in a collaborative, productive, and healthy way. Equipping people with the personal insights and practical tools to thrive, she helps leaders and teams to navigate complexity and make powerful, wise, and congruent choices, which ultimately leads to a sustainable, meaningful progress for everyone. The key to her success is working with people through 3 lenses: as an individual, a leader, and in their broader role and influence within their organisation. Tapping into each facet, she brings self-awareness to the forefront, inspiring people to be their best so they work together positively and productively. Very nice to have you on this little series, Michelle. Thank you for joining me.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Now, you are a little bit different to some of my other guests. You bring a wealth of knowledge because you actually train a lot of these senior leaders in the work that you do. But you've also been in the corporate world. So I think you're going to bring a very balanced perspective to some of these questions that I ask in the conversation overall. So can I start by asking you the first question, which is, in your travels and in your experience, can you tell us a time about when you first realised the importance of executive presence in your career? And you can go back as far as you like with that question.
I will go back to really early in my career. And it's interesting because often when people see me, they go, oh, but all of this sort of stuff must have been really easy for you, Michelle. Clearly you were born confident. No way. Early in my corporate career, I'd sit in meetings and the thought of speaking up, I almost felt nauseous. I was so nervous. And then I realized one day I would never get to where I wanted to get to in my career if I didn't find a way to be able to get my voice heard and to be able to speak up in meetings. And that for me was the genesis of really seeing executive presence, because I started to notice what people around me were doing who had that presence, who were able to hold the space in a room. And I watched what they were doing and learned from them, and also found a way to recognize that fear that I felt when I was speaking up, that it was actually a good thing for me, because it told me that it mattered to me and that I was taking this seriously, and to learn that the fear was not something that needed to hold me back. So yes, I learned that at quite an early age.
Mm-hmm. How did you move forward from that feeling of fear, and how do I go about fixing this problem?
For me, it was the want. It was recognizing that if I didn't find a way to cultivate my own sense of presence when I was in a room, to be able to hold that space, I would never get to where I wanted to get to in my career. And so once I had found that why, often we hear a lot about purpose and the importance of purpose. And for me, connected to that, I found that purpose. I found that why this mattered to me. And when you're clear on that, you're then able to put in place the strategies that you need to actually be able to bring that to fruition.
Interesting. Which actually brings us to the next question, which is what specific strategies did you use to amplify your own executive presence? Seeing these other people, and I'm not being gender specific here. So you might say, Julie, they were both men and women that I observed having executive presence. And I guess you would have looked at those people and thought, what is it that they've got that I haven't got? So what were the strategies that you used yourself?
So there are a couple of things. And look, I know that executive presence is much more than about how you look and grooming and stuff like that. But certainly that was one of the places that I started. I've always looked so younger than my age. I often think as I'm getting older, it's turned into be a benefit. But early in my career, I was really conscious. If I turned up too casual, I'd look like the work experience kid. Because I really, people used to look at me and go, seriously, but you've actually finished university. I thought you were still a sort of junior in high school. And so I used clothing to, one, be sort of project that professional image, but to also try and look a little bit older than I actually was, so that people could kind of get that age range in, at least in the right decade. And what I also found was that when I was well groomed and dressed professionally, it did make me feel more confident. It made me feel like I was part of the environment that I was in, that sort of sense of belonging. And so that for me was an important part, so that when I was at the table, I was then able to actually go, yeah, I'm here and I'm here for a reason. And it, sort of slowly you build that sense of confidence. And so whilst clothing can, people say, what is that sort of like an artificial sense of confidence? I go, actually, no, for me, it wasn't. It actually really helped me. And then it was looking at people around me and seeing the strategies that they used to be able to, one, hold the room, project their voice, speak up in meetings, listen really clearly. So I did all of that. But I also recognized that before particular meetings, particularly big meetings, I knew I would be nervous. And so I was prepared. I had done the planning. And I found that the more prepared I was in terms of who was in the room, what I needed to think about, what I needed to be prepared, all of that really helped me. And then all of those additional things, getting a good night's sleep so that when I was turning up in the room, I was refreshed. I found that it's that sense of self-care as well was really critical in helping me have the energy that I needed to be able to project who I was and who I wanted those people to see when I was in the room.
Mm. There's a lot in what you've just said, certainly from my perspective anyway, on yes, we need to prepare, we need to get a good night's sleep, we need to make sure physically we've got the energy. But in terms of also the preparing and planning, what you wore, being matching yourself against to this, I guess, to the same level or the same standard of dress that you were observing other people in the room wearing. Was that part of your mindset and your thinking process? I need to dress
I always remember quite early on, and I can't remember who said it because I know it's a quite a well-known quote, which is, dress for the job you want, not the job that you have. And that was certainly something that was in the back of my mind, that if I wanted to get to more senior levels, I needed to dress like an executive. I needed to look the part. And I think, we'll probably get into this through the conversation, but I think sometimes today we've lost a little bit of that. And yes, there's a time and a place for casual, but we judge as humans. People love to think that we don't, but we do. As soon as we meet someone for the first time, and we have this term in psychology called thin slicing, where we take very thin pieces of data when we first meet someone and we then size them up and go, do I want to work with you? Do I trust you? Do I want to do business with you? And we make that on what the person is wearing, how they're smiling, how they shake hands. So all of it goes together and it all matters.
Absolutely, I totally agree with you. We're creatures of cultural, inheritance, I suppose. So we're taught You know, even just as an early age, walking down the street, when we see people dressed different ways, oh, you know, you might not want to go over there because they're dressed in a certain. So the stereotypical dressing had enormous influence on us as we were growing up, and we were, I think you and I probably grew up fairly similar. That we were learned, or we were taught, that there was a certain style of dress for different types of scenarios. And you talked about, I want to dress like an executive. So what does that mean? You know, that means a nice jacket. It means, you know, streamlined looks. It means dark colors. It means, you know, minimal accessories. All of those things, which mean the other person can actually focus on you and listen to what you've actually got to say. So that's my interpretation of it. But yes, what you've described is absolutely correct. We are, you know, we do. We judge people every single day, every single moment we look at someone. We are judging them based on what we see. And if
Yeah.
it doesn't come up to our expectations of who they say they are on paper, then that allows us to question, well, are they who they say they are?
Oh, exactly. And I say that to people, particularly like with LinkedIn profiles. I
Mm.
say, if your LinkedIn profile picture is not who you are in person, when the person meets you for the first time in kind of real life, your brain sort of does this, oh, hang on, I'm a little bit sort of discombobulated because I thought you looked like this and actually you look like that. And you do start to question. And that doesn't mean it's the right thing to do, but it's what our brain does. Our brain naturally goes there. And so sometimes we have to work against that inbuilt bias that we all have. But it also means for people in a corporate environment, don't make it harder for yourself. You know, make sure that the image that you are projecting online aligns with who you are in person. And people often say that when they meet you for the first time. You know, they might have seen, you know, video clips of me, or they've seen me online, and then they meet me in person and they go, oh, wow, the person that you are online is the person that you are in person. And I go, yeah, exactly. And so it should be.
That's exactly, I must admit, I've had that too. Oh, you actually look like your photo. You know, why wouldn't I? It's in my interest to actually do so. So what are some of the misconceptions, in your opinion, about executive presence, and how can individuals work to overcome them? Because it's a term that's thrown around very liberally, I find, and you're correct in what you said before. It's not just about appearance. There are a whole lot of other elements that tend to fall into that whole, you know, net of executive presence. So, but there are some misconceptions. So, what are your observations in that area?
I think one of the big ones is that sense that to have that sense of presence, you have to be the charismatic extrovert, sort of the one that everyone notices, and
Mm.
not necessarily. Uh, you can absolutely have presence and be very still and very quiet and very poised, but you know when you're going to put out a comment, and you know how to make that comment land. And I think, to me, what encapsulates that is that sense of, you don't want to stop being you. Executive presence is not, you know, let's do a little bit of fairy dust, we're going to turn you into someone else. You still have to be authentically you, but it's also about perhaps refining or honing some of the edges of who you are in terms of then how you show up.
Mm.
And there's that sense sometimes that, well, does my presence coming in, and once I've nailed it, does it stop there? And I think it keeps evolving. Like, I look at myself and I go, my sense of understanding of who I am continues to evolve. I'm continuing to learn about myself, even though I feel like I've been on a self-awareness journey for many, many years. But the more I understand about myself, and the more I understand about the environment that I'm in, the more I bring that into the room when I'm with people. And for me, the key thing with presence, it is that sense of, there's an energy that you have when you're in the room. You notice what's going on around you. And it's also how you make people feel, because people who have really good executive presence, they notice. They notice what people need. They're aware of the people that they're with, and they're genuinely interested in the people that they're with as well. Whereas I think sometimes, sort of probably in the past, you know, executive presence perhaps felt a little bit egocentric. It's all about me, 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 notice me. Whereas I think executive presence encompasses a much more broad ranging definition these days.
I like that. I really like that. Because there's also the thing that, well, when does a person know that they're presenting themselves authentically? And when do they ever fully understand who they are as a person and how they should be showing up? I think a lot of people get quite confused over that.
Mm.
And they'll
And that takes a lot
emulate
of work.
people, because emulating someone else who you think, oh, that person's got fabulous executive presence, I'll be like them. But it may not be, aligned with who you are as a person and where you're going. So I think some people can make some big mistakes in that area. And that can play out in what they wear too. People trying to wear the same thing as someone else. That can often work against people.
Yeah, and I also think it's the consistency. It's, it's a bit like when you have a leader. One of the hardest things with working with a not so good leader is when they're inconsistent. One day you get nice boss, next day you get bad boss. And, because you go, oh, this person, it's hard to deal with them. And I think it's the same with when you present yourself. If there's a consistency in how you show up, that builds that sense of reputation and brand, because people go, I know what I'm getting when that person turns up. People always say to me, Michelle, you're so well groomed. And I take pride in that, because I go, oh, thank you. Well, I put effort into it, but I also like being well groomed. It works for me. So if I turned up one day and did the whole grunge thing, people would immediately go,
what's wrong with Michelle?
what's happened to Michelle? Because that is so not her. And I think once you're comfortable, it's like finding your style. So, and it goes with that sense of self-awareness, because when you're aware of who you are, what you stand for, what your values are, it's like, what's the wrapper that goes around it? And the wrapper is the outer layer of how you show up sort of physically. And that includes what you wear. And when all of those line up and when all of those are consistent, you get that sense of congruence where the person goes, yeah, I get Julie, I get Michelle, when I see them, they are the same person. And that builds trust as well, which is really important.
Totally. Yeah, I'm on the same page with you 100% on all of what you've just said. Absolutely. When there's discrepancies or where there's what did you say? Inconsistencies in how a person shows up. Yes, it allows people to have all sorts of questions in their minds as to, should I actually, be working with this person? Are they going to be good at what they do? Are they going to fall over one day? What's going to happen? So no, totally, totally agree with you there. And I also like what you said about a person that, you bring an energy into a room. And you can do that, physically, you can bring an energy into the room in terms of the amount of space you take up. But you can also, in terms of emotionally, you bring an energy into the room. And what a lot of people don't understand is that how you feel, how you behave can also be influenced dramatically by how you present yourself, how you dress yourself, the colors you wear, the style elements that you wear, how you accessorize yourself. All of that, if it's aligned with the theme of the room that you're going into and the people that you're going to meet, it can make an enormous difference to your persona and how much energy you do bring into the room.
Oh, look, I couldn't agree more. I had a session recently and I knew it was going to be a challenging session. And I turned up in bright yellow and purples and still on palette in terms of my color scheme and all that kind of stuff in terms of what works for me, having had my colors done. But it was interesting because for me, it was about me feeling good, me feeling this sense of joy about being in the room. And it did elevate and was interesting because everyone commented as they walked into the room, wow, you look really bright today. And it just set the tone for how I wanted that session to go.
Yeah, if only more people bought into that whole notion that there is a lot of psychology in what we see and how we perceive it and how we receive it as well. So let's talk pandemic. I know we sort of touched on this before, but very, very interesting time that we've been through, and one that I hope we never go through again. But it taught us a lot, but it also allowed us to observe a lot. It certainly had a profound impact on women in the workplace. So, what's been the biggest shift you've experienced in how women present themselves now versus COVID?
Look, there's a couple of things, and there's almost like a plus and a minus at the same time, which I sometimes feel like I'm not sure whether they equal each other out. You know, I'll use myself as an example. I used to be on a plane almost every week. If I wasn't on a plane, I'd be in the CBD. I don't do as much travel as I used to, and I quite like that. You know, I've got into a different rhythm with life that has impacted, in some ways, how I dress. But I'm very conscious, you know, if I'm on an online session, I am dressed for it. I often have this debate with my husband because he'll be doing sessions and I'll be going, "You really going to turn up in that shirt?" He goes, "Oh yeah, it's just casual." I'm like, "You got clients today?" He goes, "Oh yeah, but you know, we're tech." And I'm like, "Okay." Because I do think there's been a casualization of what people wear. And in some respects, I think that can be great because it does mean that there's less effort. You're not wasting as much time in the morning getting dressed. But how you dress can impact how you feel and therefore impact how you show up. And so, you know I will have days where, you know, I am working, but I'm in, you know, gym gear, active wear, whatever sort of language you want to call it. But on those days, I do not have client calls. And so it doesn't matter. But if I've got a client session, I would always get dressed for it in a way that aligns with how they would see me if I was having a meeting with them in town. So once again, I think it comes back to, it's like that sense of choice where I feel like a lot of us through the pandemic, it was survival mode. It was new. There was just a whole load of crap that people were dealing with, a lot of emotional heaviness. And, you know, many of us were just struggling to get through the day. I mean, I know for myself, I discovered a whole layer of emotions that I had never had to deal with before. And I often think that's been really good for me because it's given me additional awareness and empathy for what people can go through. And that can be a really powerful insight to have. But we are now through the pandemic. We're into that analysis of a different stage. I feel like the emotional hangover that a lot of people have had, for some, it's still lingering, but it's now going, okay, for the next stage in my career, wherever that I want to go, how does how I turn up play into that? And what do I then consciously want to do with that? Because your clothes do impact how you feel and impact how people see you.
Yeah, well, totally. Well, you know, for a lot of women who were struggling and who were having to deal with lots of different things throughout the day, they also significantly changed, some of them, in terms of weight gain, weight loss, everything. So the wardrobes they were working with pre-COVID weren't necessarily going to cut it, you know, coming out of COVID. And so they're left with this dilemma. Well, what do I do? You know, sometimes their values have changed completely. And you may have experienced this in some of your discussions that you've had with leadership groups and some of your training, that women are in this space of, well, what am I supposed to do now? How am I supposed to show up now? Is it acceptable to wear my sneakers into the boardroom and just have a smart jacket on? For a lot of my clients, a lot of them are wanting to go back to a more professional attire and to restore that level of, what do we call it? Predictability, I suppose. I don't know what people expect to see of senior executives, but then there's other women that say, well, why should we have to? And I think we're still trying to sort this all out, you know, as women. Well, where do we sit in all of this? What are your observations in some of the groups that you've been speaking to?
I always go back to who are you and who do you want the world to see you as, and make your own choice rather than looking at what everyone else is doing. Like, it's interesting because I do a lot of executive sort of facilitation sessions, and I did one recently. So 2 days. One day was team, one day was much more strategy. And my shoes changed, my outfit changed on those 2 days because they were very different purpose. The day 2 was much more hands-on, where I knew I was going to be running around the room. So I had sand shoes on. Day 1, I did not have sand shoes on. I didn't have a heel, but I had a little kind of I don't know what you call it, one of those little tiny heels.
Or a comfortable shoe. Yeah.
Exactly. And a lot of the other people who turned up were either in boots or in sand shoes. And this was, an executive leadership team, but it was, it wasn't off-site. But I'm always really conscious, particularly on that sort of first day, about the image that I'm putting across. Day 2, I was like, I have to be practical here in terms of what are the shoes that are going to be comfortable to be able to get me through the day. But I'm like you, when you're talking about before, I look at some of the clothes in my wardrobe, they're amazing. And some of my great shoes, I go, I want to wear you again. I don't want to not wear you again. Although I did discover that my shoe size changed during COVID.
Really?
Yeah, well, I lost a little bit of weight. And so you would think, doesn't that mean my shoe size might get smaller? But no, my shoe size actually got half a size bigger. And the podiatrist said, you've spent a couple of years in sand shoes or Birkenstocks. He goes, your feet have spread. So yes, I had a whole heap of shoes that I had to give away.
Goodness gracious. I haven't heard that, but it makes perfect sense that, that can actually happen. You have to retrain, and some women called retraining their bodies to actually, be able to put a wasted garment back on again, as opposed to something that was elasticized or, was training gear, which, allows you to put on weight and you don't even know you're doing it. Right?
Yes, exactly.
It,
But I go back to the, how do you want to feel, and do what works for you, and do what works for your environment as well, because there is no doubt that different industries and different professions have changed the standards of what's acceptable, and it's no longer what felt like quite sort of flat, meaning that every industry profession felt similar. I feel like it's quite distinct now, depending on what sector you're in, as to what is the norm of dressing.
Yeah. And I think it's also governed by who's leading the various organizations, because they all are as individuals, and, they say it all starts from the top, don't they, Michelle? So if they're setting a theme to dress a certain way, then, then that tends to filter, down the organization.
I
Absolutely.
remember many years ago, and this is way before the pandemic, and there was a particular CEO in an organization that I worked for, and he did not like denim. Now, you could do smart casual on a Friday, but no denim. Anyway, people kind of ignored that and started turning up to work on a Friday in a denim, and then a very direct message came out direct from his inbox that had not been filtered through corporate communications. What part of no denim don't you understand? Whereas I would go these days, you can have very beautifully tailored denim,
Yes.
and denim's very in at the moment. So I kind of go, I feel like we've moved a bit away from that.
Well, that's where I think the boundaries have all shifted a little bit, and in some cases become a little bit muddied. So that's where people's confusion are, well, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. But you're quite right. It's all about really sitting down and identifying, well, what are my values? How do I want the world to perceive me? Which should reflect then in terms of choice of dress code to reflect your personality as well, and trying to be as true to yourself as possible with what you wear, and not trying to emulate other people. So we talked a lot about this, and I think executive presence has evolved considerably over the well, at least the past 10 years anyway. Um, are you seeing it shift more towards something that's a little bit more well-rounded and holistic?
Look, absolutely. And I think what I'm seeing is, in the past, it was like this sense of you've either got it or you don't. Whereas now it's very much this sense of, as you were saying in your intro, it is a skill. And therefore, like all skills, it can be learned and honed. And also, executive presence is contextual to some extent, in that you do need to be aware as a leader of the environment that you're in and how that environment is impacting how you show up, but also how do you want to show up in that environment, and being very conscious of the impact that you're having on others. Because one of the things that I think is really critical with the executive presence is that sense of, it's almost like a humility, that you make other people feel good. People who have good, effective executive presence are able to make the people around them, no matter what level within the organization, feel good, feel okay, feel seen, feel heard. so that they walk away from the interaction going, oh, wow, that person was amazing. You know, they really listened to me. And to me, that's part of what executive presence is. And so it's almost that sense of a flip from executive presence being about this sort of outer sort of persona that you put out in the world that is all about you, to executive presence being much more about how do I leave a good imprint in a way that is healthy on the people around me.
I like that. It's very subtle, isn't it? You know, when you look
Mm.
at it from that perspective, which is much more much more relevant today, I think, than where it was before. So you have been very busy in the last few years doing your PhD. You were just telling me before, which is amazing. Congratulations, you're almost there.
Yes, almost.
So where does that see you in the next 5 years, Michelle? What, are you going to be traveling overseas again? Talking to leadership groups overseas?
Look, hopefully that's the plan. When I left corporate 10 years ago, so the business celebrates its 10th birthday in August this year, it was very much that sense of, I love learning, I love being challenged, and that's never going to change. And I just love being in the position to be able to share knowledge and share insights. And so if there's the opportunity to do more work internationally, particularly through parts of Asia as well, that, we've got a connection. My husband was born in India. So there's sort of little grains of ideas about doing some work through India. So lots of ideas, just lots of adventures as well, is what I'm really looking forward to.
That's fabulous. And I imagine that you're going to ensure that this whole concept of executive presence remains a strength for you. And I think you do rub off on other people that you meet along the way. I've known you for quite some time, and every time I see you online, you're always, beautifully presented. You speak eloquently, you speak with intelligence. And I think that's the essence of Michelle, who you are.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. Look, I really hope so. I remember when I had left corporate and got, one of my sort of first executive coaching clients. And at the end of the engagement, she said to me, "You've changed my life." And I remember walking away from that and saying to my husband, Craig, oh my God, like, wow. I look at all the amazing things that I had done in corporate, and I'd had an incredibly lovely executive career, challenging, but I'd done a lot. It was interesting. But that moment when someone said that to me surpassed anything I had felt prior. And that's not to diminish any past work, but it's that sense of, wow, I actually made a difference. And Julie, I think you would feel the same in the work that you do. When you see that difference that you're making, you go, this is worth it.
I can tell you, Michelle, there is nothing more humbling than seeing a woman break down into tears in front of a mirror because they're seeing something that they could never have put together themselves, and it makes them feel so fabulous.
Yeah.
And it's just, like words can't describe how that makes you feel.
Mm.
But yes, it is a very rewarding role that I have and job. I'm incredibly grateful and privileged to work with some amazing women, and I never undervalue what they teach me
Mm.
about humility and vulnerability and confidentiality and feeling confident, all of those things, because it's at the raw edge, when you're working with people so intimately like that you
Mm.
really do see it, first and foremost. So yes, we are very similar in that instance.
Yeah, agree.
Yeah. Well, where can people find you if they would like to touch base with you, and your books? Are they available on Amazon? How can people obtain copies of those if they'd like to?
Yes, so all three books are available on Amazon and also Booktopia. The easiest place, though, is my website, which is michellegibbings.com. And also just welcome people, reach out to me via LinkedIn. Very happy to hear from people.
Okay, wonderful. Well, thank you. It's been absolutely delightful catching up with you again today. Thank you. And I look forward to seeing bigger and brighter things for you. in the coming years with your PhD when you finally are able to get those initials behind your name.
Fantastic. And thank you. And Julie, thank you for all your support through the years as well. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're